Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women Get on Board's virtual speaker series, Building a Strong and Diverse Board Before You Go Public. While everyone comes in and gets settled, we just have a few tech tips for everybody. We ask that you please make sure to turn your cameras off and your mute on, and this session will be recorded. The recording will be shared in a follow-up communication along with a feedback survey after the event. Please feel free to use the chat function at any time during the session to ask a question to be answered during the Q&A period. Thank you for joining us today, and here is Deborah Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get on Board.
Thank you, Keisha. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to our Women Get on Board speaker series today. I'm Deborah Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get on Board. We are a member-based company that connects, promotes, and empowers women to corporate boards. We have over 800 members across Canada with diversity in our Women Get on Board membership. Our goal is quite simply to get more women on boards. We are delighted to be hosting this virtual event speakers series with our sponsor today, irlabs, a dynamic investor relations firm that goes beyond the press release, and you will see that today. So our topic is building a strong and diverse board before a company goes public. We will, Caroline Sawamoto, principal and co-founder of irlabs, will be doing a presentation. Following that, we will have a panel discussion, which will be quite lively. It'll be moderated by Alyssa Barry with Cathy Logue and Julia Stamberger. And then we'll follow up with a Q&A and a closing remark. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Caroline Sawamoto. She has 15 years, she's a principal and co-founder of irlabs. Caroline has over 15 years of investor relations and capital markets experience across various exchanges and industries. She has supported numerous financing activities for both public and private companies in excess of raising over $650 million. Caroline began her investor career with Canaccord Capital as well as she's made a huge impact through Clean Energy Solutions, led her to join Power Systems, Westport Fuel Systems, both of which are dual listed in the NASDAQ and TSX stock exchanges. Prior to co-founding irlabs, Caroline was an investor relations manager at Alabaster Homes, a privately owned real estate development company in Vancouver. She is known for her diligence, poise, and can-do attitude. So we will look forward to hearing from Caroline on her presentation. I also, at the same time, would like to introduce Alyssa Barry. I'm not sure if you guys go, she's the better half to the other half, or whichever way, but these two women are co-founders and principals of irlabs and formidable forces. They are making things happen. Alyssa has over 15 years of investor relations and capital markets and corporate communications experience. She's an activist by nature. She's raised over $1 billion of capital, led by some of Canada's most successful activism campaigns. She's managed M&A transactions. She's enhanced board governance framework. She was formerly head of strategy, operations, communications of Artis REIT, vice president of capital markets at Sandpiper Group, and investor relations at Amica Mature Lifestyles. She is known for her agility, creative poise, and relentless pursuit of success for her clients. So you can see we have two formidable forces, Alyssa and Caroline, today that will take us through our discussion. So over to you, Caroline, for your presentation. Thank you and enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Alyssa and I started irlabs because we want to elevate the investor relations profession. There's a lot of stock promoters out there, but that's not who we are. We are the strategic advisors to the C-suite and the board, helping them navigate the challenges and opportunities in the capital markets. When we started, we also made a commitment to share knowledge, committing time and resources to do research and provide thoughtful content and ideas to the investment community, all with the goal of making a positive impact in the capital markets. Board diversity is a topic we're passionate about. In collaboration with Women Get on Board, we spent the last 6 months on a research project looking at gender diversity for newly listed and uplisted companies on the TSX and TSXV for calendar year 2021. The data are based on publicly available information, including the company's website, info circulars, AIF, CDAR, and SEDI. We recognize that for this specific research, the data is focused on where individuals identified as a man or a woman and not other genders. And you'll find the research study in the follow-up thank you from Women Get On Board. Let's dive into the results. Only 15.8% of the board seats for newly listed companies on the TSX and TSXV are occupied by women. And of this, 19.6% for the TSX and 12.8% for TSXV. What a result here. Next slide. Now, there is some good news. There are TSX and TSX companies with 50% or more women directors. Planting Hope is leading the charge and at the forefront of board diversity with an all-women board and C-suite. We will hear from the CEO, Julia Stamberger, about her experience in taking Planting Hope public with all women directors. An interesting point to note, only 3.4 of the combined newly listed companies have achieved gender parity, 50% or more in the boardroom. Next slide, please. Some more interesting news, of the 91 newly listed companies on the TSX, 5 have a woman chair, and we want to highlight some of these names. Next slide. Kudos for having great women leaders in the boardroom. These are some really great names out there. Next slide. Highlighting some board diversity all-stars. Planting Hope with the highest percentage of women directors at 100%, or 5 out of 5 board seats. Universal Ibogaine for having a First Nations chair, Chief Ian Campbell of the Squamish Nation. Next slide. Now, there's still quite a ways to go. 38% of newly listed companies on the TSX and TSXV have 0 women representation. One point to note is that the exchange is not a regulator. They're simply facilitators. But we believe regulators need to step in and make board diversity a priority for companies. Next slide. Finally, we analyzed the percentage of women on boards by sector. It's interesting to see that health and wellness, comms and media, and oil and gas are at the forefront, while industrial products, services, utilities and pipelines, and life sciences are lagging. Of course, a number of new listings played a role in the sector breakdown. At the end of the day, the results aren't great, as you can see. And going back to one of the first slides, only 15.8% of the board seats for newly listed companies on the TSX and TSXV are occupied by women. We at irlabs believe that board diversity fosters an environment for innovative ideas and improve overall corporate performance. There's a lot more work to be done, and it's great to see a group like this get together and learn more about board diversity. Next, we're going to hear from Cathy on how companies can prioritize board diversity, and Julia about her first-hand experience in taking Planting Hope public with all women directors and C-suite. With that, I'll pass it over to Alyssa to moderate our discussion with Cathy and Julia.
Thank you very much, Caroline. It's my pleasure to introduce 2 highly accomplished women who are at the forefront of board diversity. Cathy Logue is one of the founding managing directors of the Toronto office of Stanton Chase, a top 10 retained executive search firm with over 70 offices worldwide. Cathy began her career as a CA with Ernst & Young and now leverages her finance expertise as global leader of the Stanton Chase CFO practice, specializing in CFO and finance leadership roles and board diversity appointments while working with clients across the entire C-suite. Over her 20 years of experience in executive search, Cathy has cemented long-standing partnerships with clients ranging from startups to publicly traded companies helping them attract high-performing talent and make their most important business decision, which is shaping their board and executive leadership team. Julia Stamberger is the co-founder, CEO, and the chair of the board of the Planting Hope Company, a plant-based food and beverage company that trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange. Julia is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience developing disruptive consumer products, complex supply chains, business models, and strategies. Julia's success began in 2004 when she was brought into United Airlines as business development manager, new ventures and investments, where she launched the airline's snack box concept that quickly became the backbone of United's domestic economy meal program. Fast forward to 2016, Julia launched Spinning Wheels Brands, where she developed and launched Planting Hope's flagship brands, Hope and Sesame, Sesame Milk, Mosaic's Real Veggie Chips, and Veggiecopia Veggie Snacks. Julia has been named one of Crain's Chicago Business Notable Entrepreneurs and is inducted into the Exceptional Women Awardees. I'm sure everyone's keen to dive right in, so without further ado, Julia, we'll start with you. Based on the results that Caroline just shared, what's your impression? Are you surprised by the information and these numbers?
It's hard to be surprised by anything anymore, Alyssa. You know, we were surprised when, we made the commitment to build out an all-women board in C-suite. We didn't realize what a unicorn we were. We did it for very practical reasons, which is, we focus on the better for you, plant-based and sustainable food industry. So our goal is to develop new breakthrough pantry staples that are plant-based, sustainable, and customers use them every day. And in our industry, 90% of the consumers that go out and look for those new products and bring them into the home are women. So for us, it made a lot of sense for our company to look like our core customer. And we, decided that we would go public with an all-women board and we would look like them. And we did that for a host of reasons. One was to look like the customer. The other one was we knew that there was really strong talent out there that was, that were an immense pool of women board members. In fact, I could give you 100 names right now of top qualified, excellent directors in the US, in Canada, in other countries who are just fantastic. We had a huge pool to pick from, and we're able to cherry pick the top talent and the most cohesive and cultural board, where it was in, and we thought this was just, kind of par for the course. Naively, then, when we started talking about having an all-women board, we found out there weren't a lot of other examples of public companies. In fact, we still struggle to find other comparables. So for us, it was a natural conclusion that really benefited our shareholders and our products. But in the rest of the world, it's a bit of an anomaly. So surprised? Yes. Should I be surprised? Here we are. It's 2022, and the US has only managed to get a, female vice president in the last 2 years. So I guess I'm not surprised. I'm chagrined, but there's so much opportunity to do better.
Thanks, Julia. Cathy, same question for you. What are your thoughts on this information?
Fortunately, not surprised, similar to Julia, but being an eternal optimist rather than dwelling on the challenges, there's a ton of opportunity out there. And if you think about the leadership that Julia has shown, and that's what it takes, is that, awareness, commitment to action and impact. And, we work with a lot of emerging boards, and that is the time when you have an opportunity to do that. So disappointing. We're seeing a lot of gains in the US with IPO boards and public company board representation of women and other diversity. So hopefully Canada can model that.
Well, look, we're not great in the US either. We are a US-based company that's going public in Canada. In our food industry, we started with an all-women C-suite, and we did that quite intentionally because so much of the venture capital in the emerging food industry, and by the way, 99% of companies in the emerging food industry are funded by venture capital and private equity, or angel investors who, again, predominantly male. We saw this continuous flow of, maybe 50% of the companies were founded by women, but by the time they'd gone through a round or two of venture capital, there was very little female representation in the C-suite or the board of directors. The investors would put in people into those companies that came for their network and looked like them, and it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over. So in our industry, we saw that firsthand. And when we made the commitment, and mind you, I've got 3 white male co-founders, who all agreed and committed to this strategy and were advocates of that. When we went out to build that C-suite, we found that, we would have conversations like, a chief sales officer who's a woman, that would be fantastic. And then we'd be like, yeah, and a sales director who'd been in this industry for 40 years is like, women are the best at sales. And I'm like, okay, name one chief sales officer that you know of any company in this industry. We're incredibly well networked who's a woman, and couldn't come up with one. And those opportunities just keep getting shut down. So we started with representation as an important part of what we do. We have 3 pillars of the Planning Co. company: more nutrition, more sustainability, and more representation across everything that we do. To really fulfill on that, this was part of that promise, and we followed through. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, this is only going to be something that we can do on a widespread basis when we demonstrate that it makes financial sense. It cannot be tokenism. It cannot be, we need to put diversity on boards because that's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, public companies are about delivering financial returns for the shareholders. And if we can, and we make a commitment to do so, do better overall for the planet, for our customers, for everything else. So our challenge now that we've come out so visibly as a woman-led company is for us to deliver on financial results. And we're working very hard to do so. Once we and others like us start doing that, then the numbers will fall in line much faster than if we assign this to tokenism or something that one should do.
And Julia, so you went public a couple months ago, a very highly successful IPO. Julia put a lot of thought into developing her board and got ahead of it well in advance, but I've heard about and I've seen firsthand that boardroom scramble where you're just about to go public and trying to make sure you've got the right people in the right seats. Can you touch a little bit on that process and what you've seen with your clients?
No, sure. I mean, I laugh, but not in a good way. And what Julia describes is a lot of the boards that we work with are mid-market, emerging boards, pre-IPO boards, and their networks. So the boards are comprised of investors, which tend to be within their network. And so then when they're ready to go public, that's their network. I was glad to see Westport was a leader. We worked with another biofuel company that was getting ready to go public, and they wanted a woman to chair the audit committee. So, women in oil and gas and energy who are, CFOs are few and far between. I think it's less than 10%. And they said to us, good luck finding someone. And lo and behold, we did a search and we found someone, and it was someone they didn't know. So I think it's lessons like that other companies can learn from. And exactly as Julia said, if you're going public, the purpose of that is to create long-term value for your investors, your stakeholders. So we know the data has shown it. ROI goes from 8 to 13% for companies that have diverse boards. So the challenge is it's never too early to be thinking about it. People aren't thinking about it early enough. And that is really the issue. And let's face it, some industries, we looked at your statistics, some industries just don't have a lot of women in leadership roles. So that, then we get into other issues and some functions as well. Specializing in CFOs, probably fewer than 15% of public company CFOs are women. So, there's a pipeline issue there. Very practically speaking, when we're working with clients who haven't done this before, competency matrix, they think they need this and that, but we're advising them on, here's what you should be thinking about as a public board, and outlining that competency matrix of what skills they really need. It makes them reflect, it makes them better positioned for success. I mean, ultimately, we can't tell them what to do. We can only advise them, but search firms can play a really important role in that process.
And Julia, you touched on this a little bit already about assembling your board, but can you just elaborate a little bit on that process, and where did you tap in for this talent pool? And also, what were some of the skill sets outside of being having the right individuals to represent Planting Hope and think strategically about your consumer, but what were some of the other kind of nitty gritty criteria you were looking for in your board?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is I think back on kind of our path to getting in each of our board members. They came principally through my network, but not just, first level network, people who would connect us to people who would connect us to people who had people in mind. It's interesting. One of the strongest connectors who ultimately through his network brought us two of our ultimate board members was a public company CEO, Doug Conant, who ran Campbell's for 10 years and made a significant commitment in his leadership to developing women leaders. And in fact, his successor that he named when he left was a woman. So that was a specific commitment he had throughout his organization. He connected us to some folks in his network who, were strong women in leadership who had performed functions that we were looking for. So we were, given that we're consumer products brands, we were looking for marketing roles that were strong with consumer products, marketing that was strong with grocery and retailer data, because we sell most of our products through grocery retail. We were also looking for competency on the distribution side of our business. And then as a US company going public newly in Canada, we also looked for very strong Canadian audit experience. And we found all of those through our own network. And what's interesting about it is sometimes multiple paths would lead to the same person. So, but truly, if we are also considering in the future adding some advisory boards and other ancillary pieces. There's only so large you want a public fiduciary board to be, but we found just so many super qualified women who had so much to bring to the table. And since we've started, operating as a board collectively in this fashion, what's been interesting to me is, I've had quite a few boards. I've run private companies for 20 years. This is the first time where I have had more than one other board member besides myself who was a woman. And it's the first time that I've had a board which was all independent and didn't have representatives from investors as part of it. And what's already truly interesting is how the decision-making and the discussions are happening within that board. It truly is about the fiduciary interest of all the stakeholders as a whole, and for the long-term longevity and growth of the business, as opposed to representing individual interests, which when you have investors on the board, always seems to creep up. So it's a combination between the quality of the board and the independence of the board, but I also do think we're seeing the results of bringing a tremendous amount of experience from women who have had long and storied careers. And frankly, grown up, most of them have 30 plus years of business experience in a world where their careers were predominantly working with men.
And Cathy, how much of it is an education process? So it sounds like Julia's got a board that really understands the impact of being a strong fiduciary, making decisions that are in the best interest of all stakeholders, thinking about the investor. How can you work with your clients or how are you working with your clients to educate them that having a more diverse board will certainly impact the bottom line?
No, absolutely. It's all about having agents for change. I think that's one, ourselves being advisors. As I said, we don't have the ability to influence directly. We can advise and we can educate. And I think looking to other companies and the data that shows that these companies perform better. I mean, it's irrefutable, right? We can advise them on what we've seen with other clients and what has been successful. And I think that's an example that you can't deny. And then of course, there's people who help in the education process, and it's the investors and the regulators. They have shown that you want to do an IPO, there's no women on your board, we won't take you public. All of those things combined. If I can go back to one thing, because I smiled when Julia said this, the network. that's an important one, because I think people go through their network, people who look for people who look like them. And it's not that first degree network, it's the second and third. And it takes not only women who, you know, if someone gets a call, they send 2 other women, you know, give them names, and those 2 women give 2 names, but it's also men, as you said, like it takes the engagement of those who have traditionally been leading and making board selection. So they are educating through example. It really comes down to example.
And Cathy, just to pivot for a second, I believe this topic ties in really nicely with boardroom diversity, but how should boards be looking at inclusive governance? A very hot topic these days.
No, we could probably talk for that at least an hour. So yes, so it's increasingly on boards' radar screens, right? And I think the shift of the conversation goes from diversity, which is really a state of being. It can't be governed, it just is, and inclusiveness or inclusivity, which you have to strive for, and it can't be governed per se, right? So when boards think about it, really there's five ways, I would say. Strategy, being it has to be embedded in the board's strategy, which will then drive, you know, the organization strategy. Again, it all starts at the top. Governance, recognizing that it's good governance to build inclusive boards. Talent management, again, so the board is not doing the execution. They're setting the strategy, dictating or, you know, influencing what management does. So organizations need to think about talent management, building the pipeline of leaders. Those are then the women, diverse leaders, and retaining that pipeline. Those are the people who will be board directors next. Integrity, holding themselves accountable. You know, boards, you think about, everyone's got a story about being in a boardroom and having a woman having a man talk over them. So people have to call out other board members, and maybe if someone's quiet, call on them to speak. So that's where it's integrity and accountability, and then ultimately performance, right? So if a board management should reflect the community that it serves, the board should reflect management and the community it serves as well. So it all comes down to belief and accountability.
It all starts at the top. So Julia, how has having a diverse board really impacted the culture that you've developed at Planting Hope?
You know, it's really reinforced something that evolved for us, and not something that we started intentionally, but that's this concept of doing better. It evolved for us over the last few months. So maybe about 60 days ago, we realized that we were saying this all the time, and it really become part of our culture. But the idea is kind of continuous improvement and continuing to evolve and continuing to do better in everything we do. So finding better supply chain options, better nutrition options, better sustainable packaging, improving our employee culture and what we're delivering for our employees, and improving how we're delivering to our customers. So this mantra of do better has permeated the organization, and makes sense at both the C-suite and the board. That's kind of our culture. It's just a continuous improvement cycle that we're on in everything that we do.
Thanks, Julia. And Cathy, just jumping back to you for a second, of the mandates that you're receiving these days, are we beyond the one and done, or are people looking at bringing on 2, 3, and diversity, not just gender, diversity in other aspects as well? Are you seeing that evolve?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, it's all about the first one, and then the first leads to the second and the third. It's critical mass, right? So organizations, or the companies that we're working with, as I said, mostly emerging pre-IPO. The first one, they might go public, and then that person, that the rest of the board will be agents of change to attract more women. The first one, again, we have to beware of tokenism. There's often that sentiment. No one wants to go on a board where they're the only woman because they have to have a woman. And then going back to the exercise of defining what a diverse board is and outlining where your competencies are, which is our first step, which I really think is fundamental. Identifying other things beyond diversity, whether it's specific skill sets and expertise, whether that's ESG, cyber, and going back to inclusiveness is engaging with boards, directors who demonstrate inclusiveness. So those are all things that can't be one and done, right? Those are things that require 3 of 5. And better yet, I think some of the stats that you showed of women having parity in certain leadership, certain Canadian boards, that's encouraging, because that's where that critical mass comes from.
So if I can add on to that, Alyssa, I think one of the other things when we talk about diversity, it's not just, ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender. We found that in building kind of a well-matrixed board, industry background, but level of experience, we have some newer board members, we have some very experienced board members, age plays into it, different roles and levels. So, if you have, 5 people who, are all women, but they all have, 20 years of experience in the same industry doing the same thing, you still don't have diversity, even if they're racially diverse. And you don't have the kind of diversity that serves active discussions at the board level that are going to deliver the ability to do better for the stakeholders in the company and the rest. So when we put together our board, we looked at kind of a matrixing different levels of diversity. We do have, some ethnic diversity, maybe not as much as we would like, but, we also have a lot of diversity in terms of experience and background in industries and age that really bring an interesting and robust conversation and levels of experience to the board and to our decision making.
That's a great point, Julia. I mean, without that, you run the risk of groupthink, which really stifles innovation. So, when we're working with clients, if they're looking for someone, they have to look at board ready women, not necessarily women who serve, because the number one issue in finding diverse and particularly gender diverse talent is overboarding. Everyone wants the same people.
That's
And
true.
with ISS, and rightfully so, putting a cap on the number of boards that a woman or that anyone should sit on, it kind of tightens up that pool. But experiential diversity, being years of experience, industry, those are all critical.
Now, one thing that some of the experienced board directors that we talked about, because there are a couple that we were interested in, but they were boarded up, to your point, Cathy, they had very specifically identified other women in their network that they thought would also be well-qualified board directors because they had so much experience. They were adept at identifying them, and who also had the talent, who may be a first-time board member, but who had the talent and abilities to serve correctly. And so they referred us to other folks in their network that they'd identified who could be great future leaders. And so those women had, kind of the responsibility and the forethought to build a pipeline of other women that they thought, should and could serve effectively.
We've touched a lot on the board, and Planting Hope also has a all women C-suite. So Cathy, can you talk a little bit about the changes or evolution you're kind of seeing in the C-suite? And then Julia, would love to hear your thoughts as well on what that dynamic is like.
Sure. Well, if we think traditionally about leadership teams, particularly in established industries, there are 2 functions where we see more women than men traditionally, so it's marketing, sort of CMO, and then the CHRO, and maybe the chief legal officer. But again, there's a shortage of women. So I really believe it's all pipeline, and that's where talent management comes in. So there's a certain number of women coming out of school, coming out of grad school, they go into industries, and then somewhere along the way they trickle off. So, what are the strategies that companies and boards are using to retain them is key. And I think the other thing that's critical for boards to be mentoring management, and then management to be mentoring that next generation of leaders. Because without that, you will not break the traditional barriers to, how many women CEOs are there? I think your stats. You know, I know in US companies, it's less than 10% of Fortune 500 companies. So really takes women and men who want to drive change. You know, a key example, for example, Best Buy. So Hubert Jolly, Corey Barry, so he groomed her from CFO to CEO role. Now, unfortunately, those examples are few and far between, but those are examples that have proven to be successful, and that's what companies need to model.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alyssa, just reflecting back for a minute on some of the, you know, traditionally, you know, male versus female roles within companies in the areas it's easy to recruit. You know, we have a woman CFO, and underneath her are a couple of additional women. We didn't, you know, intentionally hire women after the C-suite, but the folks who have come to the table and been the strongest candidates are women. In my career, I have had a lot of folks in the finance function, but just reflecting back, the strongest leaders have consistently been women. On the operations function, that also, you know, is traditionally supposedly one of the harder skills and harder to find women. Well, one of the things that kicked off our ability to be able to see the opportunities ahead with C-suite is we got an amazing COO about 2.5 years ago who joined our team and quickly became as integral as a founding partner and effectively co-leads the organization with me in certain respects in terms of how we divide and conquer. She has 20 years running a co-manufacturing experience. Prior to that, finance experience at Arthur Andersen. You know, there's a depth of hard skills. And after she came on and we decided to build out the rest of the organization that way, we hired additional people into operations. Our operations group is 75% women at this point. So, you know, there a friend of mine who was on the very high levels of a brand that everybody on this call will know, mentioned at one point a number of years ago that their leadership team wanted to make a push towards diversity and said, you know what, we'll get there in the next couple of years with marketing, and we'll get there in the next couple of years with some of the softer skills, but we'll never get there in ops. Currently, their ops group is run by, you know, at this point, 50% women and another 25% of diverse men. So, you know, the opportunities and the talent and the skills are there. I think what is skewed the representation over time has been the, you know, development and the promotion of those women, the opportunities that have been provided to them. And also, let's not forget the, you know, some of the work-life balance and flexibility and other things that I think, especially after a couple of years of living in COVID, is easier for organizations to be able to provide ongoing. You know, my sister runs a group that does Amazon consulting. She comes out of Stanford with a PhD in sciences, and a few years ago decided to start this group because all of her cohort were very data driven. They wanted something more flexible, and now she has, you know, 12 employees who are mostly women who work from home, who are all, you know, hardcore data nerds. And they can do that now because, you know, there is more of that flexibility to be able to provide the ability to have a work-life balance that doesn't diminish the representation of the talents and skills and brain power of those individuals.
Great point. I mean, it really all comes down to accountability and valuing, putting a different value on what good looks like and what performance looks like, because you know, the traditional definitions have to change. And unfortunately, COVID, as we know, has probably set women back a couple of years in
maybe, but I also see it as opening additional opportunities because I'm seeing more companies. A friend of mine, also a woman, runs a very successful IT development and web company. She used to require that all her employees be in Chicago in the office. Since COVID, they had to enact the experiment of everybody working from home, and she found it to be so successful that now all of her employees can work remotely. She was able to hire better talent. She was able to hire, frankly, you know, more women were available who were at a higher, you know, talent level and skill set. And yes, you know, I have 3 small kids. You know, without some great, you know, parenting and collaboration with my husband, it would have been very difficult for me to do what I've done while they've been at home. So there's always a partnership aspect in the rest. But I do think that there's a bit of a silver lining to COVID in that it's taught people, kind of forced people to be able to have responsibility and accountability from working from home. And predominantly the experiments worked.
Just building on that point, Julia, and this is a bit of a, I guess, a hypothesis on my part. We're in the middle of a talent shortage, a great resignation. We're seeing headlines of CEOs, C-suite burnout, stepping back to spend more time with families. I guess, Cathy, do you think we're going to start seeing as those positions are vacant? Are we going to see more women stepping into those? And does that create a greater talent pool for those women who, I'll take a step back, I'll sit on 1 or 2 boards, and then for them to be whether it's public, private, nonprofit, whatever it may be. Do you think we'll see a bit of an evolution there over the next little while?
Oh no, and I think we've seen it already. I guess you can't be on any panel right now without talking about the great resignation and what it means. We've certainly been incredibly busy, both with boards and across the C-suite over the last 2 years. But I think now we're seeing the shift from the great resignation to the great retention. And how do you keep people and stop that drain? Certainly within organizations at the C-level, clients are more open to considering a CFO, say, who has no prior CFO experience. And so women who might not have traditionally or historically had an opportunity to step up to those roles are now getting more CFO roles. Those will be the audit committee chairs of tomorrow. And again, that goes back to Julia's point. It's not always about having 30, 40 years of experience. In fact, it's better to have 20 or less. The only challenge with that, of course, comes back to overboarding. But yeah, we've seen a dramatic shift in leadership teams because people are given the opportunity to step up to the plate, and we're valuing what performance looks like in different terms, and that you don't have to be in the office to perform.
One thing I'd just like to add to the women and board issue is that I have seen many more women say to me in the last 5 years that they're looking out for board seats and opportunities. It's become an evoked set of what people want to do, experience that they want to garner, and goals that they believe are also achievable and should be part of their future career and development path. And by identifying themselves as somebody who is a board candidate, that has also increased the pool. Because if you don't show people examples of what's possible in those opportunities, they won't start to think of themselves that way. And that's one of the things, by the way, that we're, also happy to be able to do in terms of being in our own leadership position. We're very visible now that we've become a public company. We're visible, we're a consumer products company. There are a lot of young women who are our customers. And I received just an email after being on a panel with I think it was a family wealth office a few months ago, from a group of women in London who said, look, we tuned into the panel because our CEO was going to be on it, but we saw you and you just want to say thank you because now we realize that's possible for us and that's something that we can actually do. And we should start thinking that way, that we can, think bigger and we can do these other things. And so I think for us to be able to add more women, we have to show more women what's possible and make serving on a board, serving at C-level, part of their career goals that they want for themselves and they'll be able to achieve. Because once they identify that, they're much more likely to be able to actually achieve that goal versus it never being, on their evoked set of development opportunities.
All right, I'm looking and there's a flood of questions, really good questions coming in. So bringing it back to what brought us here today, just before we dive right into the Q&A, just for some final thoughts. We're here because we looked at results of IPOs and uplistings or graduations on the TSX and the TSXV. We know there are many other exchanges as well, but those are the ones we focused on. Julia, just to end us off here, and I'll ask Cathy the same question. We're at a tipping point. What are your thoughts on no diversity, no IPO? I'll just throw it out there.
I think that we are in an odd political climate across the globe. I have never seen so much polarization in the US and across the world. And if we can't get together on things like, COVID is a real disease and a pandemic we should deal with, then it's hard for people to get together on other ideas. And the risk that we run in making absolutes is into politicizing something which shouldn't necessarily be political. So, I believe that the true path forward is by developing the channel, showing the representation, and then very importantly, following up with financial results so that this becomes something which makes sense for everyone because it takes a company further forward faster and delivers for shareholders versus being a requirement that people grumble about because they feel it's tokenism they have to fulfill. So it's a very fine line, and one that I think that leading by example and showing how that develops and developing more, frankly, men who want to put women first, as my 3 co-founders did, then that is what's going to get us there at the end of the day, rather than just regulation.
Thanks, Julia. And Cathy, what are your final thoughts?
Well, first thought is it's hard to comment on this without throwing some people under the bus, but you know, we've clearly made progress in Canada. There's been gains in the US, but there's a lot more to do. You know, to your point, the regular, you know, ISS and Glass Lewis making recommendations to vote against non-gov chairs or entire boards who don't meet their diversity requirements, for example. That's all. It's great and it's important in the point of view of creating awareness and setting examples, but ultimately it's the investors, it's the regulators, the legislators who they're the ones with the teeth, right? So it's time to bite down and clench your teeth, I would say. And the number one thing is awareness. You know, these sort of conversations, the success stories of Caroline, you and Alyssa and Julia, promote the heck out of those things, right? That will show that it's not tokenism, that a company will be successful because of this, not despite this, or not because, you know, they have to.
Thank you so much, Cathy. All right, I'm going to jump right into the questions here. And the first one is for you, Julia. Is your board diversity something that you can directly speak to your customers on? Can you draw upon that board diversity as it relates to your customers? And is there any risk in doing so?
So first of all, yes, we can. You know, our messaging about, you know, our commitment to diversity as a company is front and center. And, you know, not only are, you know, we visibly, we call ourselves a woman-run, woman-managed company, and that's on our communication to our customers. But we also are doing as many things as possible in terms of who we're partnering with and how we're promoting those folks. Everything, you know, from the artist who helped to develop our new Hope and Sesame branding to our brand captain, who also runs an independent series of Asian-themed cafes, to others who are affiliated with what we do. You know, we make representation and what we're doing to develop that part of our messaging. To launch our new kind of breakthrough product, we're very excited about our Hope and Sesame Milk, our barista edition, which we're introducing into cafes. We actually developed a barista board of directors in partnership with the Canadian company Iovia. And we created this community very carefully, selecting through a long application process, baristas who are committed to sustainability, but also diversity in and of themselves. And we're building that out with men and women who represent, you know, both ethnic diversity as well as diversity of ideas and diversity of thoughts. And we're making that something that helps us to understand opportunities for sustainability in independent cafes, as well as for a way for us to understand how our product may work there and the things that we can do together. So it becomes part of our language and part of what we do for our consumers that shows through in different areas. We're not going out there and beating people over the head about it because, you know, we don't think that's necessary or wise. But when we do things like when we developed, for instance, our new Hope and Sesame packaging, we did panels and focus groups of women of different ages and background when we tested kind of our overall messaging and appeal. And by the way, we found out that what women are looking for today with their consumer products are whimsy, joy, entertainment, fun. They're all good colors. They're sick of, you know, all the gray and black of COVID over the last couple of years. But we incorporated that feedback and that representation into the DNA of how we developed our brands. So for us, this is a little bit more holistic in terms of how we reach our customers. And also with retailers, by the way, there's always been an interest in supporting diverse businesses, but unfortunately, the certifications related to diversity aren't necessarily, don't necessarily fall back to management. It's usually about ownership. And again, you get to that self-fulfilling prophecy that most of the investors are male. So how do you qualify, even if you're a women-owned, fronted and managed business? So this gives us an opportunity to also say, hey, here's who we are. And we are a publicly traded company. So we can't tell you that we're 51% owned by women, but we can tell you who we are and what our values are and how that fits into what you're delivering to consumers.
It seems, Cathy, you've got a great case study here in Julia and Planting Hope to share with some of your clients as you move forward. Just jumping to the next question, which for you, Cathy, how do we get more men as allies and sponsors for board-ready women?
Well, first of all, it's not something that can be mandated, right? The conversations that we have often, the man who is going to be the mentor or the sponsor for an emerging female or diverse leader, the stories I hear are, I have a daughter and this is important to me. And those are great stories. Again, it's about realizing the impact that those leaders can have as they advance through the C-suite, as they advance to a board. The reality is we don't have board parity. We don't have board parity in the C-suite. So unless there are men actively engaged in the conversation of, promoting, encouraging women, maybe not necessarily, some don't step up necessarily, but seeking out those women who are high potential leaders, men have to be engaged in that conversation. And gosh, it's not only men, women too. Often women are our own worst enemies in promoting other women.
Cathy, you mentioned something that I've seen pretty consistently, and that's that the men who have been most supportive throughout my career, early on, everything from, folks who ran co-packing organizations, vendors, investors, et cetera, they have often had either a very strong mother, who worked, who had a career, who developed it, who was a leader, or a very strong sister or a very strong daughter. So they've had direct and positive connections to women and those role models from a very early age, typically. And that has made them, non-threatened by female leadership, embrace those qualities, help to support. So it starts very, very young. I have a 9-year-old son. His mother has run companies since before he was born. That for him is very normal and natural. And that's the way the world is. And that will always be that way for him. Other kids haven't grown up with that advantage in terms of what they're exposed to at an early age. So I think a lot of this is not short-term, but very long-term thinking. How do we collectively develop men who embrace and value what women bring to the table and are willing to go out of their way and support that, or in the case of my co-founders, step out of the way and support that? And how do we foster that for the long term? Because this isn't a flash in the pan issue. We've been struggling with this for decades. The women have been struggling with the representation issue for so long. And it feels like we've made a lot of ground. And then we look at numbers like this and we're like, oh, hell, did we make a lot of ground? Where are we now? But, this is the long game, and we must all play the long game in order for this to change ultimately.
Great point, Julia. I for one, love the company of you ladies, but I can't wait till we don't have to have a panel about this.
There's a really great question here that's come in. And I know I have this conversation all the time, and I think there's some prospective board members or aspiring board members attending this conversation as well. It's a bit of a chicken and egg challenge sometimes, where a company going public wants to bring on experienced public company directors. And I think we've seen that talent pool grow. And Julia, you've got on your board directors who have prior public company experience, and some this is their first go around, but it's not their first in this business strategic like environment. So let's have that conversation a little bit about how can someone get that first opportunity with a public company board? Maybe we'll start with you, Julia.
Yeah, I will say that those board members that we have added who have not had public company board service directly experience before, one thing, just thinking back, I noted they have been C-level at public companies. So they have been adjacent. You know, they do understand kind of the machinations and the requirements of a board and of a public company. And so if you think about, you know, who is adjacent to the board, all of a sudden you have thousands of candidates, you know, women who have served in a senior VP, an EVP, a C-level where they need to report to a public board, but yet they haven't had that board experience yet. You know, those are candidates where, you know, you're not pulling somebody who has, you know, no experience, 10 years into their career, you know, they have no idea what they would even do on a public board. You're pulling in people who that is an obvious next evolution in their career, but they're not coming in as neophytes. They're coming in with enough experience that you can build on that and leverage the experience of your more experienced board members to, you know, help them to grow. But again, they're also bringing in some fresh perspective. You know, they haven't, you know, seen that, well, things are done in a certain way. And frankly, some of them might be more interested or open to doing things that are a bit newer. For instance, you know, right now, you know, 4, including myself, of our board members are based in the US. But, you know, they were willing and interested to come onto a junior Canadian board because, you know, that for them was an interesting opportunity and development adventure aside from, you know, NASDAQ only for me, you know, which could be the attitude of others.
Definitely, when we're thinking about talent and advising clients on boards, you know, especially if it's, you know, emerging pre-IPO boards, that's often they're looking for that talent, someone who's proven, served on another board before. But exactly to Julia's point, if you have women who have been in senior roles where they've had significant board interface, they have an appreciation between strategy and governance and execution. The other thing I will say is that everyone knows a lot of pre-IPO boards, there's a lot of heavy lifting that goes on. So having an executive who's in a sitting role, they have that ability to wear 2 hats, to be at 10,000 feet and be in the weeds. And sometimes some individuals who've served on bigger company boards might not have that capacity. So
yeah. And Cathy, I'd add on to that, you make an excellent point about you know, folks who might be overboarded or in a lot of different roles. You know, typically if you bring on somebody who's a bit newer, they may have more bandwidth because, you know, companies like ours do ask a lot of their board members. And if you've ever tried to coordinate board meetings, you know, with busy people who have other jobs, it's like herding cats, you know, add another 4 or 5 board seats to that list and get in line. So, you know, there are a lot of dynamics aside from, you know, just the surface ones to consider in building out a truly effective board.
Okay, well, thank you both so much. There are a few more questions that have come in, but we're running out of time. And what we will do is follow up over the next couple of days, because I think it's really important that we do address all the questions that have come in. You are both absolute dynamite. I've had the privilege of working very closely with Julia over the last several months, and I can speak firsthand to seeing just how much work and how fast a board and C-suite of all women can move. So it's been quite impressive. With that, I will pass it back to Deborah for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Julia. And thank you, Cathy. What great discussion, such passion. And I hope everyone will go away with some thoughts on how they can lead in the boardroom. One thing I do want to say, there's the power of 3 women in the boardroom. So having 1 woman in the boardroom is a beginning, having 2 is presence, and having 3 is a voice. So let's all work to getting a voice in the boardroom table. And Julia, I know you're already doing that. So that's awesome. So on behalf of our speakers, Women Get On Board will make a donation to our charity partner, which is Dress for Success. And also thank you to irlabs for being our sponsor for today's Women Get On Board speaker series. Our next Women Get On Board speaker series is April 27th, and the topic is Courage in the Boardroom. It will be sponsored by Director of Prep. So hope you can join us. You'll have a follow-on thank you email shortly with a survey link and some of the content from today. So on behalf of Women Get on Board, thank you, stay safe, and be well.